The institutions in our constitution were developed during the British regime. Even the working of parliamentary form of government was based on the parliamentary form adopted by the British government before the independence of India. In this chapter, we will study the systematic development of our institutions and the laws which were enacted by British Parliament to regulate Indian government system. During this period, we can divide the era into two phases: before 1858 and after 1858. It means the whole development we can study during the regime of East India Company, and after that when Crown took the charge of Indian administration in 1858 after the first revolt. ओके तो चलिए ये चैप्टर स्टार्ट करते हैं. हम इसके इम्प्लीकेशंस पे भी जाएंगे, जो फैक्ट्स हैं वो भी जाएंगे, एंड हाउ आवर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन was developed and what are the important factors, what are the important regions which affected the development of our constitution. Because the evolution of our constitution has its origin from these laws, but as well as Motilal Nehru Committee report 1928, Cripps mission, and different proposals and resolutions passed by the Indian National Congress was the basis for different provisions which are present in our constitution. So all these evolutions or these incidents we will study in a systematic form from 1773 to 1935. We will study it into three parts. Evolution of Indian Constitution. You know that our constitution came into commencement on 26 January 1950. But we had constitution from 1773. Although Indians were not involved in the making of the constitution. But if the constitution is the set of rules to govern a state, then the first time rules were designed in 1773. If we define constitution as a document which defines the structure, composition of the government system, their powers and authorities and relations, then it was 1773 document which first time provided for a systematic government structure. Although after the first freedom struggle 1857, the Indian people got chance to be the part of government system. Initially they were the part of legislature, but systematically they were involved in the Governor General Council, and slowly they became the master of the government. But initially they were given the participation in the lawmaking process. Before that, Indians were not formally included in the governance system. Although they were getting their part in army, they were employed in the services, but they were not the part of higher level decision making body. After the commencement and establishment of Indian National Congress, after 1885, the democratization process was started. Saying this is not very true, but representative system was started. Democracy was not the part of the system of British Empire, but the representative system was the part of system. So we will study those incidents when the representation was started, when representative bodies were established, when the government system basically was designed, when judicial system was established, legislature was given the primacy in our governance system, means parliamentary form of government was adopted. These all things were happened during this era. Evolution before 1857, 1858 and after 1858, यानी 1858 से लेकर 1935 तक, 1773 to 1858. In two stages, we will study the evolution of Indian Constitution. Before 1858, we had Regulating Act, we had Pitt's India Act, we had Charter Act, 4 charters, were enacted by the British Parliament. प्री में पूछा जाता है कितने चार्टर एक्ट पास किए गए थे? 4. कौन कौन से? चार्टर एक्ट 1793, चार्टर एक्ट 1813, चार्टर एक्ट 1833, Charter Act 1853. The term of a charter was 20 years, and after every 20 years, a charter was enacted by the British Parliament. It means there were 4 charters which were enacted before 1858, 1 Pitt's India Act, 1 Regulating Act 1773. In 1857, the first war of freedom struggle started, which is known as First Revolt, 1857 Revolt, which shook the foundation of British Empire. And after that, British government taken decision to end the East India rule in India, and all the powers of governance in India was vested within the crown. And that's why after 1858, the rule of British directly started in India. Before that, British government was not taking charge directly. Through the East India Company, they were implementing the rules and regulations. But in 1857, revolt, this charter was ended before the completion of term, and a new act was passed, Act for Good Government in India. Act for Good Government in India. Act for Good Government in India. It is also known as Act for Good Governance in India. First time the good governance concept was also used in this act. But here was the good term related with the better system provided to the Indian people, yani improvement in the government system. It means Regulating Act 1773 was the beginning of rule-oriented government. After that, Pitt's India Act was enacted. I will discuss some historical event due to which these acts were passed in India. Basically, in 1600, a company was established, constituted by the shareholders of Britain. They were the traders, and collectively they gave the name East India Company. They came to India and they started their business. Initially, they introduced and started their factory in Surat, but due to Portuguese conflict, they shifted themselves in Machilipatnam. They were traders, they were not indulged in political conflict at the time. But when the Mughal Empire weakens with the death of 𝐼𝐸𝐻𝐿𝐵, now there was a chaos, political chaos, due to which their profit was affected. And after the political disintegration, now the tax regime was also become very difficult. That's why they thought that without having, because the opportunity was there, they thought by having a political control, they can get more and more benefits. And due to which they start intervening into political affairs. And they fought many wars, but East India Company was a trader. That's why the rules and regulations were related with the commercial practices only, not with the defense practices or political practices. That's why they demanded some assistance from the company to protect their interest here, and they granted money and they gave permission to have a small army to protect their interest. And now the army was here on the company expenditure, but the officers of the company started taking benefit and they were indulged in the political conflict, and they were using this army for their own interest. They were getting rewards, and the rewards were their own because there is no provision of these kind of earnings in the company accounts. That's why corruption increases. And regularly now they were not paying more attention toward the trade practices, commercial practices, and they were getting indulged or involved in political conflicts day by day, which affected the revenue of the company. Although the revenue of the officers were increasing day by day, but the company's revenue were decreasing day by day because expenditure of the war was borne by company, but the profit and income was of the officials of the company, because in company's account there was no provision for this. And in 1857, before 1857, many incidents were there where the company had tried to establish monopoly. Although it was started in 1757 when Plassey War took place, and War of Plassey designed a new political framework in India. And when in 1765 to 1762, because after the Buxar War in 1764, now the whole territory was indirectly under the subordination of Britishers, because in 1761 in Panipat War, Maratha was defeated, and Maratha were defeated. It means the power of Maratha, which was more than the Mughal emperor at that time, Now the biggest hurdle and biggest challenge for Britishers were weakened. Now the Britishers tried to establish monopoly. In Buxar War, they defeated the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam and the Nawab of Awadh Sujauddaulah, and at the same time the Nawab of Bengal Mir Qasim, and joint army was defeated in that war. And now the Britishers, means East India Company, was not just a trader, they became the administrator. As Mughal Emperor granted permission, they granted the power to collect taxes. Revenue power was granted to the East India Company. And they started collecting taxes from Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha, due to which the corruption increases manifold, because now they were in revenue administration, and which led the company at its lowest financial status. And then company demanded a financial assistance from the British government, because in an agreement, British government was bound to give assistance whenever company will be in deficit, because company was giving them profit, share in the profit. That's why when they demanded assistance, then the government was completely shocked, because the officials were having their big houses, they were having palaces, and the company was in deficit. That's why an inquiry commission was constituted. Inquiry commission said that due to lack of effective regulating rules and effective regulation of the company, due to lack of effective structure in the company, lack of accountable system in the company, they are indulged in corrupt practices. So there is a need of strict check and control over the affairs of the company, and they suggested to establish a separate governing bodies which can control the affairs in India. That's why 1773 Regulating Act was enacted. In this act, because before this act, what was the position? In India, East India Company having three presidencies: Madras Presidency, Calcutta Presidency, and Bombay Presidency. Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. And now the biggest was Calcutta. A centralized system was introduced. First time a centralized system was introduced when the governor of Bengal, this presidency was known as Bengal Presidency, headquartered in Calcutta. In Bengal Presidency, the governor of Bengal was given the status of Governor General of Bengal. Means, if you see, (1773) Regulating Act. What happened in this act? Number one, Governor of Bengal was designated as Governor General of Bengal. First thing, कि जो बंगाल का गवर्नर था, he was designated as the Governor General of Bengal. And now 4-member council was constituted, and it was said that it will be a governing body which will look after the affairs of East India Company in India. And other presidencies like Madras, Bombay, these presidencies, Madras presidency, Bombay presidency, headed by their own governor, they will pass their rules regulation like before, but no rules regulations will be implemented before without the consent of Governor General of Bengal. It means before 1773 each presidency was having a governor independently work, but due to lack of coordination there was a corruption, that was mismanagement, misgovernance, maladministration. So to tackle this problem, British Parliament enacted 1773 Regulating Act, and in this Regulating Act they tried to consolidate the system, and this system, the biggest presidency Bengal was given the charge, and the Governor of Bengal was designated as the Governor General of Bengal, and other two presidencies and their governors were kept subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal. Means they were under the subordination of this institution, and their work means their rules, regulations, laws were approved by the Governor General of Bengal. Second point, what happened? The Regulating Act 1773 provided for establishment of Supreme Court in Calcutta. Establishment of Supreme Court in Calcutta. Establishment of Supreme Court in Calcutta. याद रखिए, this is not the Supreme Court of India. It was the Supreme Court of Calcutta. Okay. However, certain disputes were arising because the jurisdiction of Governor General of Bengal and jurisdiction of Supreme Court of Calcutta was contradictory, because in the matter of officials of the company, the jurisdiction was not defined. That's why this was a big conflict, big bone of contention, which was handled afterwards. Secondly, establishment of Supreme Court. Third, it provided that the company will give a regular report to the government regarding their political affairs, treaty and wars. Whatever political agreement they did, whatever the conflict they faced, what war was fought by the company, what was their income and what were their revenues, every detail were supposed to give the British government. A regular report about political affairs and revenue. In this way, 1773 Regulating Act tried to establish a systematic structure, coordinated system to govern the affairs of the company in India. याद रखिए, not the affairs of the country, affairs the company. Okay, not of the state, not of the Bengal, but within the company a structure was created which is presently known as government. But the first initiative was taken in 1773. After that, there was some dispute. One dispute was, here there were 4 members, and the provision was that the decision will be taken by majority. Now, here the dispute between Governor General and the members of the council were arising. 3 members aside can take a decision. So they tried to avoid Governor General of Bengal in many issues, and lobbying was started, which causes a dispute in the government system, governing body. Similarly, on the matter of jurisdiction of Supreme Court of Calcutta, again the dispute arises because the Supreme Court was having jurisdiction on the revenue matters in Calcutta, but on the officials of the company, who will exercise the authority, Supreme Court or Governor General of Bengal? It was a bone of contention between the Governor General and Supreme Court. That's why in 1781 this problem was resolved. In 1781 problem was resolved by removing this problem, Act of Settlement. A law was passed, Act of Settlement. This act was passed. Here the number was reduced to 3. What happened? Council, members in the council was reduced from 4 to 3. And it was provided that the decision will be taken by majority, but in majority Governor General should be included. Means all the 3 members, even all the 3 members alone cannot take decision. Although 3 can take decision, but not these 3. 3 should be included Governor General of Bengal. So one problem is resolved. Second, in the matter of Supreme Court and this dispute, now the settlement says that the officials of the company will be under the control of Governor General, and Supreme Court will not exercise its power over them. And in this way, the problem was resolved. Act of Settlement. After that, another law was passed, and the law was Pitt's India Act. As I told you, in Regulating Act 1773, it was provided that the company has to submit a paper, a report regarding its political affairs and revenues. But company failed to do so, and due to which it was a strong belief at the time that government should exercise its control over the company, and the political affairs of the company should be under the control of the British government. And for that, Pitt's India Act was enacted. Pitt's India Act introduces hierarchy in the company. This question is of much importance because in prelims it has been asked that in which year the hierarchy in East India Company was introduced. Here 4 questions of the same type. Hierarchy in East India Company 1784. Hierarchy in Bengal 1765, when revenue functions were given to the company and political functions were conducted by the Nawab of Bengal. Dual role. Then hierarchy in Bengal 1765, when revenue power was vested within the company and political power was vested within the Nawab of Bengal. Two government, yani dual system. In 1784, hierarchy was introduced in the company. Means again, dual system was introduced. What dual system? Two governing institutions were formed. Board of Control and Court of Directors. Two institutions. Initially, everything was governed by Court of Directors. It was the supreme body of the company, Court of Directors. And they were involved, they were managing all the political, economic, financial affairs of the company. But now the duties and responsibilities were divided. Now duties and responsibilities were divided. Board of Control was a governing body of government, British government. And this body was of shareholders of company. This body was belonging to the shareholders of the company, while this body was consisted of the officials of the government. Now, the political and strategic affairs was governed by this board of control, while commercial affairs and recruitment in the company was governed by court of directors. Now dual system was working in the company, and by this act, first time British government directly started controlling the affairs of the East India Company through board of control. Okay. Now after that, in 1793, first charter was enacted. Charter Act Charter Act 1793. For 20 years, the arrangement was completely provided. This arrangement will continue for next 20 years. During this period, different other provisions were included, like the strategic, yani ki commander of the army. Now the Governor General was declared as the Supreme Commander of the Army. Today, you know, our President is the Supreme Commander of Armed Forces. And this kind of provision was started in this year, 1790. Now, different other provisions were continued, like Board of Control, Board of Directors, for next 20 years. It was just an law which continued the established system. In 1813, Charter Act 1813, different provisions were included. Number one, trade monopoly. End of trade monopoly. Trade monopoly was ended. Now the East India Company and other British companies were around, but the monopoly of East India Company was abolished. Although trade with China and trade in tea in India was monopolized. Still, only East India Company was authorized to trade with China and trade in tea in India. It means now the Indian market was open for other British companies. Before that, other companies were compelled to purchase the Indian product through the East India Company only. And East India Company was taking its profit while selling the product to them. But now East India Company was no mediator. And the companies, other companies of the British were given the right to purchase the product, right to trade directly with Indian people. Secondly, first time the East India Company was declared one spend of 1 lakh rupee for education. First time, because they wanted the people with Indian blood but British thinking. They wanted the brain of Britishers, and that can be done by teaching them English. And that was the reason that 1 lakh rupee for education. 1 lakh rupee for education. Thirdly, Christian missionaries were allowed to spend their religion. They were allowed, missionaries were allowed to propagate their religion. Christianity. Missionaries were permitted for religious propagation in army. सेना में क्रिश्चियन मिशनरीज को आके धर्म प्रचार करने का अधिकार दिया गया. And this way, the law, Charter Act 1813, started. The new provisions related to making the company more diversified, and now the company was mainly indulged in political affairs. Simultaneously, it was changing from a business company to a political institution. And the step was this: when trade monopoly was ended, so that they can be declared as a political unit. Now, 1833. In 1833, another act was passed, Charter Act. Charter Act 1833, and in this act 3-4 important provisions were there. Number one, all the presidencies were lost their autonomy. Now, after combining all the presidency, a new entity was formed, British India. Now, Bengal, Madras, Bombay, and other British possessions were collectively formed British India, and first time the government of Governor General of Bengal became the Government of India. First time the concept of Government of India came into existence. British India. Second, Governor General of Bengal was converted into Governor General of India, and Government of East India Company was converted into Government of India. Governor General of India, which was consisted of how many members in the council? 3, because in 18 you see that 1781 Act of Settlement, now at that time the members were reduced from 4 to 3, and those 3 members were here. But when now the Governor of Bengal collectively British India को regulate करने लगा, so now there was a need to make laws for all the presidencies, because till date all presidencies were making their rules regulation, only they were to take approval from the Governor General of Bengal, but now they were devoid of this right. Now they had no right to make rules, regulations and laws. They were now centralized within one authority, that was the Governor General of India. And Governor General of India, now 3 members were already in the council. 4th member was included. 4th law member was included. Law member was Lord Macaulay, and this council was responsible for making laws for whole territory of British India. Now the centralization process, which was started in 1773, now it was completed. Centralization process is now on the absolute term. Complete centralization was there. Centralization process was completed with the combined structure British India, and all the powers were vested within the Governor General of India. Now British India was a completely centralized entity, governed by British Governor General of India and 4-member council. That 4th member was added in 1833, and he was Lord Macaulay, but he was not in executive council. He was additional member, law member, and whenever the council was indulged in making laws, the Lord Macaulay, the 4th member, was only providing the legal advice, because he was the law member. And in this way, the Governor General of India was started governing the British India with the help of 4 members. Okay. In 1833, complete centralization began. See, after that, after 1833, many other decisions were taken during this. Act of Sati was abolished and legalized under 1833 Charter Act. Similarly, bounded labor, slavery was abolished by the British government. Although many other initiatives were taken, and Lord Macaulay, under the chairmanship of Lord Macaulay, first law commission was constituted in 1834 under the provision of this law. First law commission under the chairmanship of Lord Macaulay was constituted in 1834 under the provisions of Charter Act 1833. merit system was introduced first time. Merit system was proposed. Means job on the basis of merit, written examination. It was proposed, but it was opposed. Indian cannot be given this facility, and due to opposition of Court of Directors, this provision was not implemented. Although after that many other initiatives were taken by the British government to control the Indian people, and due to many regressive policies, the discontentment, dissatisfaction among the people of India was increasing day by day. Although during this increasing discontentment, another Charter Act was passed by the British government in 1853. And during this phase, within 20 years, 1833 to 1853, different, for example, Lord Dalhousie introduced doctrine of lapse, a regressive settlement policies, and regressive and contradictory decisions were taken by the British government, which led to the dissatisfaction among the people of the society at different level. Although without paying attention on increasing discontentment among the people of the country, they introduced fourth Charter Act 1853, without considering the demand of the local people, without considering the situation in which they were living, the problems they were facing, the challenges their family was facing. The British government was completely aloof, and it introduced fourth charter in the line, and that fourth charter was Charter Act 1853. Important provisions of the charter was the merit system, which was not implemented in 1853, finally implemented in 1853, which was not implemented in 1833. Although the provision was made in 1833, but not implemented, and finally implemented in 1853. Merit system was introduced in India. Second, Lord Macaulay became the permanent member of the Executive Council of the Governor General of India. Lord Macaulay became the fourth permanent member in Governor General of India Council. गवर्नर जनरल ऑफ इंडिया की काउंसिल के चौथे परमानेंट मेंबर ये बन गए. साथ ही in this year the law making function was separated from the executive function, यानी separation between executive and legislative function. Separation between the legislative and executive function. And in this way, the separation of power, concept of separation of power was introduced, and parliamentary system of government came into phase. Either in beginning, it was an initial phase, but we can see the jhalak of Indian Parliament in this sense, because now the two meetings were arranged. One for the legislature, here 4 members and some other additional members were sitting in the council, but when the law was to be implemented, then only 4 members were there. It means now executive and legislature got separated, and from here we can see the origin of legislature. Although here they tried to make some specialized governance, they tried to establish a government system of parliamentary nature, but people were in different mood at that time. They were living in misery condition. They were thinking about certain relaxations from the government. But with the doctrine of lapse, they tried to take all the things which they possess. The government tried to take everything from them. And the policy, economic policy, their religious policies, their political policies were very regressive, which make the people against them. And finally, in 1857, this law lasted only 5 years, only 4 years. And in 1857, revolt was emerged, and this act ceased to operate. Although during this development, the first visualization of government we can found in 1853. First merit system of officials like civil servant we can see 1853. The separation of executive and legislature 1853. We can see a parliamentary cabinet in 1833, but centralized India in 1833. But it was during the East India Company, and the laws were made by the British Parliament. But due to this revolt, British government was bound to change the regime in India. And finally, after the end of revolt, the British government enacted Act for Good Governance in India. And with this act, many changes were made in the system, and new system was introduced, which can be seen in our constitution even today. When after 1858, even in 1858, many things, many provisions were added which are still in our constitution. But after 1858, Indian Council Act 1861, Indian Council Act 1892, Indian Council Act 1909, and Government of India Act 1919, Government of India Act 1935 were the important legislative initiative which provided the basis of present government system. And what were the important provision in 1861 Indian Council Act, 1892 Indian Council Act, 1909 Indian Council Act? We were discussed in next class. Okay? And this is just an introduction. Here you can get questions for prelims, but in mains the important laws are Government of India Act 1919 and Government of India Act 1935. And whenever the questions have been raised, the area is this. Okay. If you have any question, you can raise. Thank you so much. मिलते हैं next class.